Welcome back to, I guess it's the 14th episode of our Innovation Circle podcast. It's a great pleasure to see you, everyone here again. We were sitting here talking before, and it's just to bring us back on where we were last week, because this is going to be a continuation of last week in a certain sense. We have now been over these 14 episodes painting a picture of what different aspects of transformative innovation. And it's been everything from, practical examples to different regional efforts, etc., conceptual discussions. But last episode, which was the first after the summer, we actually entered kind of a new phase in the sense that we were digging into very practical policies. And one of the themes that came up in the discussion was also kind of what is policy? And we tend to think about policy as only more programs and instruments, regulations and financial incentives and information campaigns, etc. But the fact is that policies has at least two extra legs, which we kind of don't connect to the program. But it's one being the steering principle, the fact that you can have goal attainment, but you can also have network steering that becomes more of the decentralized bottom up, whereas the first goal steering is obviously top down, and you can even have client driven steering principles. And one of those things that, it shows that when we go into transformative innovation, it's impossible to set the goals. We don't know where we're going. So hence we couldn't set up the goals necessarily. So mission orientation and setting up mission has been a way of thinking differently in how to connect people and how to engage and spur innovation. And that's the network steering principle. Now, there is a third leg in this, and that is which then sort of concludes and makes an integral part of policy, and that's learning. There is no policy process worth the name of it that doesn't have a learning process in parallel. And now today we're actually going to integrate that into the discussion of missions. If the last episode was about missions more in general, we're now today going to talk about how you actually integrate and embed learning in transformative innovation missions. So to conduct this core conversation, we have Alex, Glennie, a very familiar face from our ETIN efforts from Nesta. And she is going to talk to Abigail Stocker from Innovate UK on this topic. So, the floor is yours. And I don't want to prolong this because I'm so eager to hear what you are going to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Mikhail. No, it's great to be here. I've been a guest on an ETIN podcast, but not a moderator yet. So I'm thrilled to be sort of picking up the reins and having this conversation with Abby, who I've been working with for a while now. And so I thought she'd be the perfect guest to come on and speak about what Innovate UK's been doing. So just to sort of set it out, you gave a very brief introduction to sort of us, Mikhail, but maybe Abby, could you just introduce yourself a little bit, say a bit about your role at Innovate UK and maybe anything about Innovate UK in general that you think it's useful for people to know before we get into the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everybody. Really happy and excited to be here and speak with you today. So I work at Innovate UK, which is the UK's innovation agency. And we're part of an overarching organisation called UK Research and Innovation, which was formed in 2018 and encompasses Innovate UK, plus all of our research councils who are focused predominantly on funding in universities. So I'll talk a bit more about our experience with missions, but my specific role, I'm a lead specialist for research. And I often find I kind of occupy the space between academia and policymakers. So I'm kind of a conduit between academics and their thinking and theories and amazing stuff that's going on there, and then translating that back into the organisation so that we can actually use it to make better decisions and be more effective. But yeah, our primary purpose is to support businesses and business-led innovation in the UK.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, that translation role is so interesting and sometimes difficult to balance. People are often talking about the same thing, but using different language and having different ways of understanding things. So yeah, without wanting to spend too much time on definitions and theory and so on, because we do want this to be very practically focused, I thought it would still help to start by grounding it in sort of, what is Innovate UK's understanding of transformative innovation or innovation missions? How are these concepts sort of used and understood within your organisation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start. So yeah, I think our understanding of missions is has probably evolved, and I will talk a bit more about the journey that we've been on. But I think we try to align ourselves with the academic thinking, but also have to balance that in the practical realities of being a government agency. I find the OECD did a typology of mission-oriented policies and split it into 4 types. And I find that quite useful to refer to. And based on that, we definitely focus our efforts, or have done historically, more on the challenge-led missions. So these typically are delivered by agencies, and they're kind of maybe slightly more discreet than some of the bigger overarching missions that tend to be set by central government. So it's a good way to help us understand what we've done so far, and I think that's then informed how we've approached missions moving forwards. The biggest challenge fund and mission that we've delivered is the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. So this was based on or in response to the government's industrial strategy. It's made up of 23 challenges across 4 challenge themes. And I think that for us was a real eye-opening experience, and a kind of real deep dive into how do you deliver challenges. And some of the core features of those challenges were really that they were very much focused on bringing together multiple stakeholders. They were looking at either transforming sectors or creating new ones, and working in a much less siloed and boundaried way than we had before. So I mentioned earlier that Innovate UK is part of UKRI, and with our approach to missions, we do recognise that we all need to work together, because we're essentially part of the same research and innovation system. So we can't ignore the universities and what they're doing and just focus on businesses. So yeah, I think that's kind of that's really shaped our approach to missions. The other thing as well that we see as part of the missions concept or package, whatever you want to call it, is the place element. So we make sure in all of our competitions that place is embedded and is a core consideration when we're designing something. And I think missions and challenges really are a good example of where this is absolutely critical, because they recognise that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. So yeah, that's kind of how some of the key things that we'd look for when we're thinking about missions, and whether or not we think something is a mission or isn't.
Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, quite a big shift for Innovate UK, because pre-2018, it was a more independent organisation outside the Research Council structure, and very much focused on sort of supporting businesses to do innovation, much more sort of traditional innovation policy funding instruments. So this is quite a shift and a transformation, I would imagine, internally. So yeah, I'm just sort of interested to hear a bit more about sort of that journey of Innovate UK moving into more of this challenge and now mission space, which I guess has been kind of an evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, as it currently stands, 25% of our funding goes towards missions and challenges, which absolutely wasn't the case before. But I think, like a lot of innovation agencies, we've been on a journey, and increasingly have recognised, along with the wider community, that technology and technologies aren't discrete things. They don't sit somewhere and operate on, kind of on their own. So it's recognizing that actually a lot of the societal challenges and issues that we're trying to face need multiple stakeholders involved, and technologies and behaviours. You need people to adopt and actually use the things you're developing. And I think the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund was like the first point that we really got to actually see that happen in practice and deliver this massive programme that really was the first of its kind. So yeah, there was lots of learning throughout that process. ISCF was set up very much as its own sort of discrete unit within the rest of Innovate UK. So I think that, that's an interesting one and could be debated either way. Our mission's sort of an overarching approach for an innovation agency, or are they one part of their policy toolkit that is just for specific challenges? And I think, like I said before, the thing that really made ISCF different is this transformative focus. So not just funding existing sectors or existing technologies in specific areas, actually looking at the wider picture and seeing opportunities for sectors to pivot, or the need for a sector to pivot based on wider societal challenges like the green transition and other issues that we're facing as a society.
So, I mean, maybe the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund is a good sort of place to dig in and think about this question of learning that Michael was talking about at the beginning. And, this is a new and evolving way of doing innovation policy. The outcomes are not known in advance. The nature of the challenge is that you know what problem often you're trying to solve, but you don't know what is the best way of doing that. And perhaps you don't even fully understand the problem. So you have to do a lot of learning as you go. I guess you've been thinking a lot about sort of piloting, pivoting, evaluating within that program. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about how that learning operates within that program.
Yeah, definitely. I think the structure of ISCF has lended itself really well to learning, actually. So it's been delivered over multiple years and in multiple phases, which has been a really great opportunity once a phase has started to then kind of reflect, take stock, see what's working, see what isn't, and then iterate and make improvements. So I think even just that structure of not just launching everything at once has been really successful. I would say it's not necessarily groundbreaking, actually, in terms of how we have approached learning, because I would really say, I think on reflection, the need to operationalize learning has been really key to ISCF. So it's a big fund. It includes multiple different teams across different organisations and external stakeholders as well. So having just some really solid processes in place, which I know isn't glamorous, but I think shouldn't be overlooked, because in terms of the practical delivery, it is actually really helpful. So with ISCF, there were multiple layers of governance. There were specific boards set up purely to focus on performance and impact reporting, and that I think is great to have those kind of things, because you've got an opportunity for senior leaders to meet with analytical colleagues and really have those open channels. And we also had groups that were purely focused on kind of the external stakeholder landscape, which then fed into that group. So you've already got a structure through which information can flow, which I think can be a real challenge with some programs. So that worked really well. The team structures as well were specifically designed for ISCF. So each program had, or each challenge had, a dedicated challenge director, and they were typically people who had already had a lot of experience in a particular field. They were well connected and able to facilitate that stakeholder engagement. So they could hit the ground running, really, in terms of bringing stakeholders in and getting them involved really early on in the challenges. And each team also had an impact and performance manager dedicated to that specific programme, which again, for Innovate, was something new that we hadn't done before, but it recognised from the offset that we needed to have these measures in place up front to really make sure we were capturing learning in what is quite a complex way of operating.
And that suggests sort of having a dedicated role for that it was sort of happening throughout, and not, as you often find with learning or evaluation, that maybe there's a bit of work done at the beginning or a lot of work done at the end, but it's not always that constant sort of review. So is that how it worked in those challenges, having that sort of constant monitoring and pivoting along the way?
Yeah, it definitely did. So I think I mean that was always the intention. It's a point that we might get into later, but I think one of the things with big challenge funds and big missions is typically they represent a really big investment of public money, and therefore people, governments, whoever's kind of funding the mission, want to know fairly quickly what impact they're having, and that there's definitely challenges there with regards to measuring transformation. But I think that really helped from like a reporting point of view. But yes, exactly. It also meant that things that were being learned could be picked up really early on. So one of the things that happened in some of the later challenges is that earlier challenges hadn't necessarily explicitly recognised the need for interventions or provisions around development of talent and skills within that sector or sectors that were being focused on. This was picked up and lessons were learned, and then for subsequent challenges, they made sure that talent and skills was in fact a really core part of that, and some of our most impactful skills interventions have now come from the ISCF. And again, that recognises the role of missions and the way they can bring in multiple different pieces of the puzzle to work towards one common goal. So yeah, I think it's been a really good opportunity for multiple teams across Innovate and UKRI to learn, and I guess again on a really basic level, learning about how to work with teams across organisation, which can present challenges and opportunities as well. So yeah,
we might come back later to that sort of collaboration angle, and not just what happens internally at Innovate UK, but also how you work with the wider system, given the systemic nature of some of these challenges that are being addressed through the mission approach. But yeah, I'm sort of curious to ask about what some of the challenges have been around learning. Is it different, sort of very different, when it comes to these bigger, transformative, more complex or uncertain challenges compared to more traditional innovation programs?
Yeah, I think there's probably similarities and differences. So on the differences piece, as I mentioned, I think the measuring transformation is, I'm sure you've probably talked about this topic before, but measuring transformation is really difficult, or can be really difficult, and it needs time. So most government agencies, certainly in the UK, we have typically 2 to 5 years worth of government spending allocated and agreed, and after that point there is a cliff edge, so we don't know how much funding we're going to get moving forwards. So then it becomes really difficult actually to plan these longer term, bigger evaluations, which I think do lend themselves well to missions and challenges, because they're such big investments up front, and because they are ambitious and really want to achieve more than just what we would typically measure, which would be stuff around economic impact, that fairly standard sort of metrics. Actually, it's thinking about the people side of things, behaviours, all of these other things that are more difficult and take time to measure. So I think that has been a challenge, and in the same sort of way, the political cycle is hard for missions, because again, they tend to be longer term. In the UK, it's a 4-year cycle, so there's an element of certainty, but you can find yourself in a situation where you have a mission and then it needs to be sort of reviewed in light of a government change, and that can be quite disruptive. So they're fairly sort of practical things. And I guess with government as well, it's making sure that there's still that top-down buy-in, because I think we found with the missions we've done that you do need a combination of top-down and bottom-up buy-in to actually be able to deliver, because otherwise it can be really, really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of opens an interesting question about, what conditions need to be in place for learning to be done well. I mean, let alone for the missions to be done well, but for learning within those missions as well. And, what makes it easier or harder to do learning within these types of missions. And I think that point about the sort of mismatch sometimes between the time horizon needed for some of these ambitious transformative missions and the reality of government cycles and changing political priorities is a really interesting one. What else have you sort of noticed in doing these missions around the things that make it easier or harder to learn as you're going?
Yeah, I think so with most of the missions that we've worked on, there's quite a strong co-creation element, as would be expected, because the idea is that it's not us necessarily driving it, we're working really closely with stakeholders. And I think that can both be amazing and challenging in terms of learning. So amazing in the sense that you've got access to all of these different types of people, these different partners who have already been trying quite a lot of stuff in their sector. They've already been testing certain things. So for example, another initiative that we've got at the moment that's currently up and running is No Limits, which is a mission to increase the diverse talent pipeline for the UK. So making sure there's a really strong flow of diverse talent to go into careers needed for innovation. So I think, sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought.
No, we were thinking about sort of the conditions that need to be present for,
That's it.
Missions to go well, learning to go well within them. I think the No Limits mission is sort of an interesting example of that too.
Yes, sorry, I was trying to get the right words for No Limits. What I was going to say, sorry, is learning from partners. So within the No Limits mission, we work with lots of partners who are already delivering lots of initiatives to try and build inclusion, diversity within these kind of innovation careers. So we don't have to have all the answers ourselves. We've done quite a lot of work to build up the relationships with them and actually to learn from what they're facing, kind of the challenges they're addressing. Some of them are very similar, so it can be stuff around, particularly with sort of talent and skills, EDI related stuff. Measurement can be really hard. It sort of links to what I was saying earlier about transformation, but sort of, yeah, being able to draw on what they've already done in that space is amazing, and we can really learn from that. And in the same vein, if we're working with regional partners, we've got some more sort of like regionally focused challenges as well, we can learn from what they've already tried in the region and don't have to kind of go through that process ourselves. So that's fantastic. I think on the flip side, the sort of challenges that come with co-creation are, by its very nature, there's more people, there's more opinions, there's different opinions, and being able to get to a place where you kind of have the right mechanisms for people to feed in at the right time, that can be quite challenging. And it's something that I'm kind of really keen, I've been thinking about it a bit and talking to colleagues about it, is how do we overcome some of these challenges with co-creation? Because I think we're sort of in a time at the moment where we may be asked to do more with less. And I don't want co-creation to kind of be seen as something that's a huge investment of time and doesn't necessarily produce the right outputs. So yeah, that's just something we're thinking about, and I don't necessarily have the answer to. But I think there can be real benefits to both the effectiveness of your program or mission, and what you can learn when you're working with multiple partners from across the ecosystem.
Which, yeah, I think is one of the other things that is qualitatively quite different about sort of the mission agenda, is that it can't be delivered by just one actor or stakeholder. It has to be a collaboration and bringing together people with different resources, different skills, different sort of capabilities and ways of doing things. So it will never just be Innovate UK on its own able to sort of make the UK's innovation system more diverse, which is a big complex mission, and that would require a lot of transformation. It has to be done in collaboration with others, and I think that's sort of maybe one of the really interesting questions for the ETIN network to pick up as well, because it is all about bringing different people together from different parts of the system, and thinking about how do we work together to drive change, and then how do we learn collectively as well. So I'm quite interested to sort of open it up, see if there are sort of questions at this point. We can keep talking, but I know that people on this call will have interesting things to contribute as well, and I can see that Shellhawken has put his hand up already. So
thank you for the interesting talk, and I wanted to connect to what you were discussing lastly here, and one of the things that I've been seeing, I come from Vinnova in Sweden, by the way, and that is the balance between competition and collaboration that you want to create in an ecosystem. Because usually if you want to look at micro solutions, they are developed best in competition. You cannot have a joint collaboration and think that you come with the best solution. But still, as you pointed out, you need collaboration on a different level. For example, we have been discussing in the ETIN network about innovation commons. How do you create common assets that can really make transformation and more effective? So how have you been working with the balance between competition and collaboration? What has been the areas for collaboration and what has been the areas for competition, and how have you treated that?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and I think it's an interesting one, because for me that's maybe also an area, we're sort of talking about the balance between academic thinking and practical realities, that maybe is sometimes missed when we're thinking about missions in the more theoretical point of view. So I would say, I mean, one of the things that we have kept even within our missions approach is we have kept some of our more traditional funding mechanisms, which I think allow for competition more so perhaps than some of the more collaborative pieces. So I think that is a way that we can do so. And I guess it's just about with the collaboration piece, trying to really articulate what is in it for the businesses typically that we're working with, to like what is in it for them basically if they collaborate with others, if they get involved in these transformative programs. And I think we were quite, I would say quite pleasantly surprised really with some of these ISCF challenges, where we were drawing heavily on the business community in specific sectors, and we weren't sure necessarily how open to that they would be. They're used to coming to us for funding, we give them funding and they go and do their thing. So we were actually really quite pleasantly surprised by how willing they were to get involved to shape the future of their sector, because they saw that as critical to their ongoing competitiveness and the ongoing success of their businesses. So that's been a really great learning. I think obviously you've got to manage expectations well and make sure you're not taking businesses away too much from their core priorities, because we want them to be doing what they do, innovating, growing, all of that good stuff. But yeah, it's been, I'd say, an interesting learning curve, and I think that probably more implicit really in our programs, that balance between competition and collaboration, but definitely a really important point to consider, I think.
Yeah, just a small follow-up. Have you been able to incentivize, because usually in business are looking at proprietary results, have you been able then to incentivize to share successes and failures in such a way that the systemic benefits come out?
We've been trying to do that with our No Limits partners. So they're not well, some of them are commercial businesses, but some of them are kind of they're more in like the they're skills providers, or they're sort of third sector charity type organizations. So as part of the No Limits platform, we've actually built in a function whereby they can share success stories and post about their successes, and we're really trying to push that. Failures, less so, I would say. I think that is such a hard one, and even sort of doing the more formal evaluation processes when there's multiple partners involved, it's difficult. It's really difficult, and I'm not sure. We did do a bit of work a little while ago with the behavioural insights team, linking to No Limits, and we talked quite a lot about the benefits of sort of incentives versus, or carrot and stick, basically. So incentives versus something less so pleasant, I guess. And I think we came to the conclusion that we needed to test a few approaches and see what works. But yeah, I think that's definitely a space that we're still exploring.
And there's something about sort of the public versus private nature of some of these conversations, the things that happen in public. Sometimes there's less willingness for people to get into the failures, whereas some of the more sort of closed spaces where people are able to talk more openly about that, hopefully creates opportunities for that kind of learning as well.
Yeah, and I think as well, when it's conversations about the future of a sector, that's more comfortable than more specific conversations about what a business is working on.
Emily, can I bring you in?
Well, thanks so much. I love these kind of chats, and I'm gonna dial back to one of the initial topics you guys were talking about, the maybe not so you said a little bit boring structured processes for learning. I am interested in, like, what are those structured processes for learning? And then I'm curious, this is the second part of the question, I'm curious about how you manage the tension between the desire for impact measures and kind of more qualitative results or insights from learning processes along the different phases of implementation of working with challenges. How you manage that? Are there different, when you talk about these structured processes for learning, how are they relating to these more formal evaluations of impact? What do these two things look like?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Emily. So I think when I was talking about the structured learning, what I really mean there is governance. So I think that having just very clear governance structure with accountability mapped out at the start is, from my experience, essential. And we've tried to do similar sort of missions and challenges where we haven't necessarily had that agreed, and it is significantly harder. So I think that's where I would start. But also things like reporting. So with ISCF, every single challenge team had its own dashboard that was constantly being updated and being fed in with information from across the different companies that were being funded and different interventions and things that were happening. So that was all in one place, and it was just a go-to that everybody knew that's there, so we can reference that if we need to. I think linking to the kind of third part of your question, how does that link in with the evaluations? What it did mean is that actually we, from the word go, we had some pretty strong metrics to feed into evaluations, which of course should always be the way, but isn't always the way. So, but for ISCF, that was there. So there was that kind of clear link, which was really good. And I think they, on like a broader level, as an organisation, one of the other things we've been working on is basically this massive sort of, I don't know what to call it, like a massive lessons learnt repository thing. It's a bit of a beast, but that draws in learnings from across all of the missions and challenges we've done. So that's specifically focused on missions and challenges. And what that enables us to do is then when we're thinking about, okay, are we going to be asked to deliver a mission that's focused on X next year, looking at this and then kind of reviewing our existing state of affairs, like, do we have the capabilities and capacity to do that? So that's kind of it. Again, it's not particularly groundbreaking, I wouldn't say, but actually just having that has been really valuable and has brought in a lot of that learning, including the more kind of quantitative, non-metrics driven stuff. So particularly like feedback from teams, members, feedback from members of boards, that kind of thing.
Great, thanks. Very interesting.
There's something there about like the real-time nature of the data that you're able to collect or not. I think this has often been a challenge with assessing innovation programs, that you're often having such a big lag between implementing the program and then capturing the data sort of later down the line at a point when it's no longer helpful for you to feed it into what's happening. So I think there's a really interesting big question about data, sort of new ways of gathering and using data, and sort of including sort of machine learning and new approaches as well. I'm not the expert on that, but that would be a fascinating topic to get into as well. Yeah, something there about how do you capture stuff at a point where it enables you to actually make change as you're going. So yeah, maybe one we can return to. Mikhail, do you want to come in on this, or change the subject?
I find this is a fascinating topic, because this kind of this experimentation learning is really at the core of transformations. And in the ETI network, we have been discussing a little bit sort of what we call strategic learning, and it takes a little bit of a different approach in the sense that since we can learn from the past, but the problem is that the past is what brought us here, and we can't say that much about the future. We can so integrating and learning as we move along becomes very important, and that creates two aspects of that. One is that we have to distinguish about what we learn about in different parts of a process, let's say, right? You set out a program, then you have a different kind of information and learning that you have to process, and then you make a decision about that, and then you move on into what is kind of an implementation, and that obviously has different parts and sequences and all that, and then you have another kind of decision to make. It connects much more to the sort of the decision moment. What do you do with the knowledge that you acquire? So that's one aspect, that there is kind of a sequence of different kind of learnings that and that you have to acquire, right? And but the other point is probably more related to my question. The different second aspect of the way we perceive strategic learning is that it doesn't emphasize necessarily the kind of the metrics and etc., but rather, because you can't say too much. You don't have the goals, you don't necessarily have the right metrics, but you have to have new capabilities to do this. So the capability question here, is this something that you have in your organization encountered, or say we have to upgrade ourselves and able to learn, and we need new capabilities to actually learn about what we need to know? Is that something that you have encountered, and if so, is that something? What has been your solution to it, or the steps that you've been taking? That will be sort of what I'm curious to hear about.
Yes, I would say yes, that definitely resonates. I think, yeah, the capabilities question is really interesting, and We've done some work actually previously with the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, kind of on that and on the capabilities that are needed. And I think things around sort of coordination is absolutely critical, but we're talking coordination on a much bigger scale than most of us would be used to. So that's been really important. But also the stuff around evaluation but dynamic evaluation, and that really resonates what you were saying about not necessarily knowing what the metrics are up front, because in a sort of traditional evaluation you'd set that all, it would kind of be set in stone up front, and then it just continues on as expected. But with some of these more complex missions.
No, because I mean the wording that kind of becomes our mental map in the work that we're doing within the network is that the traditional evaluation is a process of verification. You set up the goals and you see to what extent you are fulfilling the goals. So that's verifying, and then you need in an ideal type situation that then you have an external evaluator asking the questions in order to get transparency, and there's no corruption, and it's control. It's controlling either everything from illicit things to actually just simply goal fulfillment, but it's controlled. What we're entering here is a process of exploration, which is very different. Because then the actors, probably the external evaluator, is not the one who is capable of doing this. There has to be someone that actually knows it from the inside, and it's a strategy for development. So there are new actors to be heard. There are new experts. There are no external experts, but there are internal experts. It's actually the ones who are doing the things that are the experts. And this kind of a little bit where we are in ETIN, I think, because everyone is an expert. It's just that we come from different parts, and just managing that as a learning process required different skills. I really liked what you were saying about coordination. Yeah, coordination becomes very much a skill, and it's also right. How do you meet people? How do you get people engaged? You can't be, snobbish or anything, or you can't put yourself on a pedestal as the expert, because you're not. You're probably more a person that have to listen. And so the capability question here becomes, I think, very interesting, because there are also new capabilities coming in, right, that we haven't talked about, perhaps. I don't know.
May
it's just a reflection. Yeah.
May I add to that, because that was an area which I usually make the comparison with football. Usually you see scoreboard management. You look at how does the match go? Are we winning or losing? And we look at the easy to know outcomes and impacts. But we know from when you do this kind of system that it's the behavior that creates winnings or losses. So if you don't understand the team, the football team, and its behavior, that's what you train. You will never get in a winning team. So that it focuses from the effect logic to measuring behavior, and the behavior of the team you have to change or do the transformation. So have you been able to really find data and capture the behavioral aspects that really create the transformation? Because you don't have to even think about much of the scoreboard if you have the right team and the right behavior on the field. So that moves completely the traditional way of evaluating to what Alex also pointed out, to real time and have a coach you understand what is happening on the field. Have you been able to capture that in data and things? And because that would be very interesting from a learning point of view.
I would say on a journey to be able to do that. So we've got an impact. It was launched last year, the impact management framework, and that basically has a suite of metrics that you can choose per program. And there was a real push when we were developing that, not just to focus on the traditional economic measures, but actually to start moving into things like, certainly things around sustainability, but also touching into that behavioural side of things. I think it is hard to measure. And the other thing as well, which is a practical consideration, but when you're reporting back to government, typically you can't just say, we've changed behaviours, you also need to demonstrate some kind of economic progress. But I think that framework is our first steps towards being able to do that. And definitely, if anyone else has kind of figured that out, I'd be really keen to have a chat, because that's one of the things that I want to figure out. But also that impact management stuff does give us again more of a real-time view, and you can change which metrics you select as something goes through. So that gives you that more dynamic ability than like a traditional evaluation piece. But yeah, I'm super interested in the behavioural side of missions, and I think it still feels like it's a developing area, certainly from what I've come across.
I think, yeah, so it requires innovations in how we do learning, and you might want to speak a bit more to Vinova on this, because we had a session at the Innovation Growth Lab yesterday hearing more about their impact innovation program and how a whole new sort of evaluation system is required to sort of learn about how we're driving very big sort of long-term ambitious transformation missions. So we don't already have the tools that we need perhaps to do this kind of work, so we're building them as we're going with the missions as well, which I think is an exciting place to be in. Are there any final questions, thoughts, reflections from anybody else on the call?
Doesn't seem like that, right?
No.
No, I mean this has been extremely exciting. It's really, I'm very glad that both of you can make the time. So this is a continuous conversation, and Abby, you should join us, the network.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, no, this was a really interesting insights you brought in, and we're going again. I think we're in a stage now in transformative innovation that we're getting to, like I said initially, we're in real time. We have data now. It's happening. So we're not planning any longer. We go from implement or from planning to practice, which is the how as in planning and how as in practice. Okay, Olivia, you have things to say. I know.
Exactly. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alex and Abby, for this fantastic discussion, and a big thank you to our audience for all the questions. And now is the time to move to our fun segment of the podcast. So for those who join us for the first time, we're about to play a game called One Truth and Two Lies with our guests. And it's a great way for us to get to know them a bit better on a more personal level. We've already played once with Alex in our previous episode, so today it's Abby's turn. She has sent us 3 statements about her life in advance, and your task is to guess which one is true. And at the end, Abby will reveal the correct answer. So let's start. I will show you the statements and read them out loud. Here they are. So I used to work for an English lord. The actor Hugh Grant is a close family friend. Whale watching was a common pastime for students at my university. Very interesting. Let's set the poll and we can vote. Which one will it be? Seems like we have a tie. Oh, the first one is winning. 50% of people responded like this. Let's wait for a second. But it seems like the first statement won. Abby, would you like to reveal the truth?
Yes, that was the truth. So well done. I used to work for Lord Montague, at the National Motor Museum, which is in the New Forest. If anyone is interested in cars and ever finds themselves in the UK, I would recommend going.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Abby, for sharing it.
Thanks.